For 3,000 years, humanity had been a footnote in galactic history. A cautionary tale. A dead-end species filed under self-extinction probability. Absolute. In every academy across the Empire, the lesson was identical. Humans were volatile, emotional, and dangerously inventive, but ultimately fragile. They burned too brightly, too fast, and consumed themselves in their own wars before ever reaching the stars in strength. And so, when the Galactic Empire rose across the Orion Arm, humanity was simply left behind. Forgotten, erased from strategic maps, written off like ash in the void. But the galaxy is never honest about what it leaves behind. It began in the outer mining corridors near Neptune's orbital belt. 6 Imperial destroyers, standard patrol class, heavily armed, crewed by elite officers, were escorting a fuel convoy through routine hyperspace transition lanes. It was supposed to be uneventful, boring, safe. Then all 6 ships vanished. Not destroyed. Not drifting. Not even broadcasting emergency decay signatures. They simply stopped existing on all sensors at the exact same moment. Back on Verx Prime, the Imperial Senate initially dismissed it as a navigation glitch. Systems failed sometimes in deep space. Gravity distortions happened. Even piracy, though rare, left traces. But this left nothing. No debris fields. No escape pods. No energy residue. Just silence where warships had been. Admiral Saren stood in the war chamber, his armored coat heavy with metals earned across 100 systems. His 4 ocular implants pulsed faintly as he reviewed the data again and again. "Replay the last known telemetry," he ordered. The hologram flickered. The destroyers drifted calmly through Neptune's outer ring. Then static. Instant blackout. And nothing. A junior analyst swallowed hard. "Sir, it's as if space itself cut them out." Saren didn't respond immediately. His instincts, sharpened by centuries of warfare doctrine, were screaming at him that this wasn't random. This was deliberate. But by what? And by whom? Hours later, the Senate chamber was in full panic. Holographic projections of sector maps rotated above the floor, each one highlighting missing fleet vectors. Senators argued over piracy, rebellion, malfunction, even theoretical wormhole collapse. But Saren said nothing. He was watching the Neptune corridor data again. Something was wrong in a way doctrine didn't account for. Then it happened. Every screen in the chamber flickered at once. Emergency override. Unauthorized transmission. The lights dimmed. Silence fell like a blade. And then, a voice. Human. Calm, controlled, undeniably intelligent. "You left us to die." The chamber froze. The words were not shouted, not emotional, not pleading. They were delivered like a statement of fact. Like a verdict already passed. Senators stood in confusion, some backing away from their consoles as security systems failed to trace the source. Saren stepped forward slowly. "Identify yourself." A pause. Then the voice returned. "You already did, 3,000 years ago." The galaxy map on the central display suddenly changed. Neptune, but not as it was known. The gas giant's image peeled away layer by layer. Ice, ocean, mantle, down into structures buried beneath impossible depths. Massive geometric formations. Artificial caverns. Sprawling mechanical veins stretching through the planet's core like a sleeping nervous system. Shipyards. Not imperial. Not alien. Human. A senator whispered, trembling. "That's impossible." Earth was rendered non-viable after the collapse wars. The voice cut in immediately. "You assumed wrong." Then the image shifted again. Mass shadows moved beneath Neptune's frozen crust. Not debris. Not ruins. Active construction. Entire kilometers of metal rising from the deep like buried gods awakening. And then, a shape emerged. A warship. Black, vast, armored with layered plating that absorbed light itself. Its silhouette was brutal, functional, designed not for elegance but survival at any cost. Gravity rings spun around its spine like chained halos. Then another, and another, until the Imperial sensors recalculated the data and issued a single classification. Unknown fleet density, infinite expansion signature detected. Saren's hand tightened. "This is not piracy," he said quietly. A war analyst behind him whispered, "Then what is it?" The answer came instantly. The human voice returned one final time. "We are what you left behind." Across Neptune's hidden depths, dormant reactors ignited after millennia of silence. Inside buried command structures, alarms that had not sounded in 3,000 years screamed back to life. And deep within the darkness, a single command echoed through ancient systems. "Awaken!" Far below the ice, something vast began to move. Not a fleet, not a weapon, a civilization that had learned patience. And above it all, Commander Elias Ward opened his eyes for the first time in centuries of prepared sleep. The galaxy had finally noticed Earth again, and humanity was done waiting. But in the outer dark of Neptune's orbit, Imperial sensors picked up one final anomaly. A second signal, coming from beyond the system boundary. Something was watching, and it had just answered Earth's awakening. The moment the command "Awaken" echoed through Neptune's buried core, the world beneath the ice stopped being a graveyard. It became a machine. Kilometers of dormant infrastructure ignited in cascading waves of light and heat. Power conduits that had slept for 3,000 years flared alive like veins filled with fire. Entire cavern networks shifted, realigning themselves with mechanical precision that defied natural geology. And deep within that engineered abyss, humanity returned to war. Commander Elias Ward stood on the observation bridge of the hidden command citadel, known only as Haven Null. Above him, holographic projections displayed the Imperial fleet formations entering Neptune's space. Clean, arrogant, predictable. To them, this was a border incident. To humanity, it was the end of waiting. Ward's voice was calm, but the room around him was anything but. Officers and engineers moved with practiced urgency, not panic. They had trained for this moment across generations born underground, raised on stories of betrayal and extinction. "They still think we're gone," one analyst muttered. Ward didn't look away from the display. "Let them." A soft chime echoed through the bridge. System integration complete. Across Neptune's core, massive doors opened for the first time in millennia. Far beneath the frozen oceans, the truth revealed itself. Humanity had not merely survived. They had adapted. Entire shipyards were carved into tectonic caverns, each one large enough to swallow moons. Warships were not constructed. They were grown from layered assembly lines spanning continents of metal and energy scaffolding. And now they were waking. The first vessel emerged from its cradle, like a predator breaking free of restraint. Designation flashed across Imperial sensor feeds. Unregistered class, Abyssal Dreadnought. Its hull was matte black, absorbing every trace of light. Unlike Imperial ships, it carried no ornamental design, no ceremonial markings. Every surface existed for one purpose: endurance through absolute annihilation. Then a second ship rose. Then 10. Then hundreds. And the system began to understand something terrifying. This was not a fleet being deployed. This was only the surface layer. In orbit, Imperial Admiral Saren tightened his grip on the command rail as sensor reports flooded in. "Mass emergence detected beneath Neptune crust," an officer reported rapidly. "Energy signatures increasing exponentially." Another voice, sharper now. "Sir, we are reading structure depth beyond planetary classification. This isn't a base, it's a megastructure." Saren's eyes narrowed. "Weapons status." "Charging rail arrays, point defense systems active, but..." The officer hesitated. "But what?" "Their ships are not broadcasting entry signatures. They're already in formation." Silence fell. Saren understood immediately. They had been here the entire time. Waiting. Inside Haven Null, Ward finally turned away from the tactical display. "Show me the outer perimeter." The galaxy view expanded. Imperial vessels surrounded Neptune's orbital lanes in layered formations, confident in their numerical superiority. Dozens of destroyers, heavy cruisers, 2 capital command ships. A standard suppression force. A familiar mistake. Ward studied them for a long moment. "They still think war is about numbers," he said quietly. An officer nearby replied, "Sir, they've activated targeting locks on our outer structures." Ward nodded once. "Then they've chosen escalation." He stepped forward. "Release the Vanguard." Beneath Neptune's southern trench, something older than the current fleet protocols began to move. Not new construction. Not reclaimed technology. Legacy systems. Ships built in humanity's earliest expansion era. Refined, upgraded, and sealed away because they were considered too extreme for modern warfare doctrine. Until now, massive containment fields shattered as the first Vanguard vessel ascended. Its shape was unlike anything Imperial science could categorize. It didn't resemble a ship. It resembled intent. A weapon given physical form. And as it breached the ice-covered ocean surface, every Imperial sensor in the system flickered violently. A warning flashed across every channel. "Warning, entity classification failure." Saren whispered almost involuntarily, "What are they?" A second later, his answer arrived. The human voice returned through every comm channel again. "Not calm this time. Not neutral. Final. You forgot what we were allowed to become." The Vanguard fleet ignited its drives. Space bent. Not traveled through, bent. Imperial formation lines collapsed instantly as gravitational distortions tore through their spacing protocols. Ships that relied on predictable physics suddenly found themselves fighting a battlefield that no longer obeyed standard rules. And then humanity moved. For the first time in 3,000 years, they struck back. A single Vanguard cruiser fired. No warning. No hesitation. A beam of compressed gravitational collapse tore through an Imperial destroyer and erased it from existence, not by explosion, but by removing the concept of its structural integrity from reality. The battlefield went silent. Even Saren stopped breathing for a moment. Because doctrine had no answer for that. Inside Haven Null, Ward watched the destruction unfold without expression. But his hands tightened slightly. Not in fear. In memory. "This is what they made us bury," he said softly. No one responded. Because every officer in the room now understood the same truth. Humanity had not been hiding weakness. They had been restraining it. And the restraint had just ended. Then the second anomaly returned. At the edge of Neptune's system boundary, long-range sensors detected a distortion. Not Imperial. Not human. Something else. Something vast enough to bend background radiation across multiple light minutes. Saren received the alert and froze. Trajectory. The officer hesitated. "It's not entering the system." A pause. "It's already here." And at that exact moment, every surviving ship on both sides detected the same impossible signature. Something in the dark had just acknowledged humanity's return. And it was turning toward Neptune. The moment the anomaly stabilized at the edge of Neptune's system, every side of the battlefield changed. Imperial human, unknown. All of them felt it. Not as a visual. Not as a scan. As presence. A pressure in the void, like space itself had become aware of being watched. On Admiral Saren's command bridge, alarms screamed across layered holographic displays. Red warnings overlapped until the entire tactical interface became a storm of fractured data. "Unidentified mass entering detection threshold," a sensor officer reported, voice tight. "It's not using hyperspace lanes, it's not using gravity wells, it's arriving." Saren narrowed his eyes. Define arriving. A pause. Then the officer swallowed. "Sir, It's already occupying multiple positions in the outer system. We just weren't able to detect the transition. Silence. Even Imperial doctrine had limits for how to categorize the impossible. Above Neptune, human vanguard fleets held formation. Inside Haven Null, Commander Elias Ward stood unmoving as the system projected the new threat vector. "Show me full spectrum analysis," he ordered. The display flickered. Nothing stable appeared. No shape, no hull, no consistent structure. Just fragmented readings, like reality itself was refusing to define what it was seeing. One analyst whispered, "It's not registering as matter-based." Ward's expression didn't change. "Then it's not Imperial," he said quietly. A second later, every ship in orbit received the same transmission. Not from human systems. Not from Imperial channels. From the anomaly. A pulse. A question without language. And then, the Imperial fleet fired first. It wasn't hesitation. It was doctrine. Standard engagement response for unknown entities. Overwhelm, analyze, suppress. Hundreds of energy beams lit up the dark space around Neptune, converging on the anomaly's last detected coordinates. Entire cruisers synchronized fire patterns, turning the void into a lattice of destruction. For a moment, it seemed successful. The energy impacts collided with nothing visible. No explosion followed. Just silence. Then the void fractured. Not shattered like glass. Rewritten like reality had been corrected. And something answered. Imperial ships began to disappear. Not destroyed. Not disabled. Erased. One destroyer simply stopped existing mid-transmission. Its signal cut off mid-word. Another vanished while turning to fire, leaving only a brief distortion in space where it had been. Panic spread instantly across fleet channels. "What is happening?" "Target lock failure." "No debris, there's nothing left." Saren gripped the command rail. "Focus fire on coordinates, do not scatter formation." But even as he spoke, he knew it was already too late. The enemy was not moving through space. Space was moving around it. Inside Haven Null, alarms screamed again. Ward stepped forward. "Bring up full fleet status." The display updated. Human vanguard forces were still intact, but now rotating into defensive patterns, not against the Imperial fleet. Against the anomaly. An analyst looked up sharply. "Sir, both fleets are reacting to it." Ward studied the projection. The anomaly wasn't targeting just Imperial ships. It was scanning everything. Measuring. Learning. A slow realization crept through the command bridge. "This isn't a first contact situation," Ward said quietly. "It's a classification attempt." Above Neptune's outer ring, the anomaly manifested further. Not visually. Conceptually. Sensors began to stabilize enough to produce fragmented interpretation models. And what they returned chilled even Imperial command officers into silence. A structure. Not a ship. Not a fleet. A distributed intelligence spanning thousands of kilometers, existing simultaneously in multiple positions without defined core. One analyst whispered, "It's thinking across space itself." Then the anomaly responded. A pulse swept through the system. Every communication channel lit up simultaneously. Imperial, human, emergency, encrypted, analog, even dormant backup frequencies. And this time it carried pattern recognition. It had learned something. Humanity was not the dominant force. The Empire was not the apex threat. Both were secondary variables. Saren stared at the readouts. "It's categorizing us." A junior officer asked, barely audible, "Into what?" The answer came instantly. A new transmission. Translated by Imperial systems into crude approximation. Observation. Pre-ascension CIVILIZATONSDTCTD. Silence swallowed the bridge. Pre-ascension. Not advanced. Not equal. Pre. Inside human command, Ward's eyes narrowed for the first time. "That's not curiosity," he said. An officer beside him asked, "Then what is it?" Ward didn't answer immediately, because he knew the implication. Finally, he spoke. "It's checking if we're worth engaging." A pause. "And if we're not?" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. The anomaly shifted again. This time it acted. Imperial ships began to freeze in place, not from mechanical failure, but from time distortion fields forming around them. Entire squadrons locked mid-motion, engines burning without movement, weapons stuck in perpetual charge. Human vanguard ships reacted instantly, breaking formation and retreating to safe vector zones. They recognized the pattern. Whatever this was, it was testing environmental control limits. And humanity was no longer the focus. It was being evaluated. Saren's voice broke through command channels. "All fleets full withdrawal pattern, break engagement immediately." But his order came too late, because the anomaly had already chosen its next target. Not Imperial, not human, something deeper in the system. A buried signal still resonating beneath Neptune's core. Haven null. Ward looked up at the same moment. And for the first time since awakening, he spoke one sentence with absolute certainty. "They found us." The lights in the command citadel flickered. And far beneath Neptune's ice, something that should have remained hidden for eternity began to respond to the presence above. Not human, not Imperial, something older than both. And it was waking up angry. The moment Haven null was detected, every human system across Neptune shifted into silent war protocol. No alarms, no panic, just absolute synchronized readiness. Commander Elias Ward watched the tactical display tighten around their position like a closing fist. The anomaly above the system was no longer just observing Imperial and human fleets. It had extended its attention downward. To them, to Earth's last secret. Inside the command citadel, analysts worked faster than thought. Predictive models collapsed and rebuilt themselves in real time as new variables emerged. One officer whispered, "It's mapping us through gravitational echo signatures. It's reading the structure of our underground network." Ward's eyes didn't leave the projection. "It's not mapping," he said quietly. "It's learning." A pause. And once it learns enough, it stops needing permission to act. Above Neptune, Imperial Admiral Saren was no longer commanding a battle. He was witnessing collapse. Entire sections of his fleet were frozen in temporal distortion fields, while others were being silently erased. The anomaly's influence wasn't consistent. It adapted mid-action, rewriting engagement physics faster than Imperial doctrine could respond. "This is not warfare," Saren muttered. An officer beside him replied shakily, "Then what is it, sir?" Saren didn't answer immediately, because he knew the truth was unacceptable. "This is correction." On human channels, Vanguard fleets tightened formation around Neptune's upper orbit, but they did not engage. Every movement was defensive, calculated, restrained. Because humanity recognized something the Empire did not yet understand. This was not an enemy to fight. It was an entity to survive. Inside Haven Null, Ward issued a single command. "Activate Doctrine Zero." The room went silent. Every officer froze. Doctrine Zero had never been used. Not in recorded history. Not even in simulations. An analyst hesitated. "Sir, Doctrine Zero violates containment ethics protocols established after the Sol fragmentation event." Ward finally turned. His expression was steady, but heavy with memory. "Those protocols assumed we would be fighting civilizations like us," he said. He looked back at the display. "This is not like us." A long pause. Then execute. Across Neptune's hidden infrastructure, something unlocked. Deep beneath the oceanic crust, sealed vaults opened that had not been accessed in 3,000 years. Inside them were not ships, but principles made physical. Experimental constructs. Reality-stabilized weapons. And something far more dangerous. autonomous command intelligences that predated modern human governance. The system designation flashed across every human terminal. Survival archive active. Above the planet, the anomaly reacted instantly. Its distributed presence expanded. Not aggressively, but curiously, as if it had sensed something shift in the behavior of its subjects. Imperial ships began to recover from temporal lock in scattered regions. But instead of retreating, they now drifted aimlessly, their crews confused, systems corrupted by partial reality overwrite. Saren's fleet was breaking apart. And he knew it. "We are not the priority anymore," he said quietly. A junior officer looked at him. "Sir." Saren stared at Neptune. "No," he continued, "we are the distraction." Inside Haven Null, alarms finally activated. Not because of attack. Because of breach detection. Ward stepped forward. "Show me internal integrity grid." The display flickered, and for the first time since awakening, it showed something impossible. A distortion had already entered Neptune's subsurface network. Not physically, not electronically, conceptually. Something was walking through their systems as if reading a book. An analyst whispered, "It's inside the archive layers." Ward's jaw tightened. That's not supposed to be accessible. A second later, every human ship in orbit received the same corrupted transmission. Not from Haven Null. Not from Imperial channels. From the anomaly. And it was no longer observing. It was speaking. Survival pattern identified. Every fleet froze. Human. Imperial. Even systems that were already collapsing. Ward read the next line slowly as it appeared on his console. Classification updated. Adaptive species DATCTAD. Silence stretched across the battlefield. Then, a second message arrived. Initiating response test. The void above Neptune rippled. And for the first time since the battle began, the anomaly changed shape. Not fully, not visibly, but enough for sensors to lock onto something coherent. A structure forming out of distributed mass. A decision point. A threshold. Saren felt his blood run cold. "They're not reacting to us anymore," he whispered. "They're deciding what we are." Inside Haven Null, Ward made a decision that would define humanity's return. "Pull all Vanguard fleets into defensive orbit," he ordered. An officer hesitated. "Sir, if we retreat further." Ward cut him off. "We are not retreating." He looked at the tactical display. "We are waiting." A pause. Then softer. "Because if we move wrong now, we stop being evaluated." He turned slightly. "And start being eliminated." Above Neptune, the anomaly completed its transformation. And the galaxy, for the first time, understood the true horror of what had arrived. Because the test had begun. And humanity was only one of the subjects. The anomaly's test did not begin with destruction. It began with silence. A silence so deep that every active system across Neptune, human, imperial, even corrupted sensor grids, stopped reporting noise. Not interference. Not jamming. Absence. As if the universe had briefly forgotten how to produce signals. Inside Haven Null, Commander Elias Ward stood motionless as the tactical display flickered between stability and distortion. The survival archive systems were still active, but even they were struggling to maintain coherence under the anomaly's presence. An analyst spoke quietly. "Sir, all external comms are being selectively suppressed. It's not blocking transmission, it's removing the concept of transmission in specific regions." Ward's eyes narrowed. "It's controlling causality boundaries." No one replied, because everyone understood what that meant. This wasn't a fleet. It wasn't even a predator. It was a system that edited reality to suit observation. Above Neptune, Imperial Admiral Saren was no longer confident. His fleet had been reduced to scattered formations, half-functional ships, and crews who no longer trusted their own instruments. The anomaly had stopped destroying vessels outright. Instead, it had begun testing them. A destroyer would fire, and its weapons would simply fail to have ever been armed. A cruiser would attempt retreat and find its engines already cold, as if they had always been offline. Saren clenched his fists. It is rewriting engagement history in real time. A junior officer looked at him. "Sir, we can't fight something that edits outcomes." Saren didn't answer, because for the first time in his centuries of service, he agreed. Then, without warning, every Imperial system locked onto a new signature. Massive, stable, artificial, not anomaly, not human, something else entirely. Saren's eyes widened. That signature. Before he could finish, a second fleet entered the system boundary, and reality bent around it like fabric under pressure. They called it the World Render Doctrine Asset, but its internal designation was far older. The Emperor's final guarantee. A structure hidden beyond known Imperial space, forbidden from activation without unanimous Senate override, and believed to be nothing more than a deterrent myth. Now it was here, and it was not a fleet. It was a weaponized civilization-scale construct. Inside Haven Null, alarms screamed for the first time since Doctrine Zero activation. Ward turned slowly toward the projection. "Confirm incoming object." The analyst hesitated. "Confirmed, sir. It matches classified Imperial superstructure signatures." A pause. "And it's charging." Ward's expression hardened. "So they brought it." Above Neptune, space fractured again, but differently this time. The Imperial superweapon unfolded like a collapsing star, reversed into engineered geometry. Massive ringed structures rotated around a central singularity core, each layer emitting controlled reality compression fields. It didn't fire weapons. It imposed conclusions. Saren watched it deploy, and for the first time he felt something close to hope. "Finally," he whispered, "something that can end this." The anomaly reacted instantly. Not defensively, curiously, as if recognizing a familiar pattern. Its distributed mass shifted, concentrating for the first time since arrival. The void around Neptune tightened, like space itself was inhaling. Human vanguard fleets pulled back further, instinctively retreating from the convergence zone. Inside Haven Null, Ward stepped forward. "That weapon," he said slowly. An analyst responded, "Sir." Ward didn't look away from the projection. "It's not Imperial." A pause. "It's older than their current civilization." The Emperor's secret weapon activated. A pulse of engineered reality collapse surged outward, silent, invisible, absolute. Entire regions of space began to lose structural consistency. Matter didn't explode, it ceased having definition. Even light failed to behave consistently. Imperial ships near the perimeter simply disappeared, replaced by regions of undefined space state. Saren's bridge shook violently. "Target the anomaly core," he shouted. But the weapon had no target. It targeted existence itself. And then, it struck the anomaly. For the first time, something changed. The distributed intelligence recoiled. Not in damage, but in recognition. Ward saw it immediately. "It's reacting," he said sharply. An analyst whispered, "Sir, it's adapting to the weapon." The anomaly began to restructure. Not to avoid destruction, but to understand it. Every layer of its distributed presence analyzed the Emperor's weapon in real time, deconstructing its reality collapse principles faster than the weapon could propagate. And then, it responded. The Imperial superweapon stalled. Not malfunctioned. Not disabled. Paused, as if something had interrupted its ability to finalize causality. Saren stared in disbelief. Why isn't it firing properly? Then the answer appeared. A transmission from the anomaly. Simple, clear, terrifying, incompatible threat model. Inside Haven Null, Ward's hand tightened. "This is not defense," he said quietly. It's classification rejection. A pause. And if it rejects the weapon? He didn't finish, because the implication was obvious. If the weapon was rejected, then the Empire itself might be next. Above Neptune, the anomaly expanded again. And for the first time since its arrival, it stopped treating the battlefield as a test. It began treating it as a decision space. Humanity, Empire, unknown construct. All of them were now variables in the same equation. And something vast was preparing to solve it. Inside the Imperial Command Bridge, Saren finally understood. We didn't bring a weapon, he whispered. We brought a question we don't understand the answer to. And in the darkness beyond Neptune, something answered back. Not in words, but in action. The anomaly began to move toward the Emperor's secret weapon. And it was no longer observing. It was deciding what deserved to remain. The moment the anomaly moved toward the Emperor's secret weapon, the entire Neptune system entered a state of silent collapse. Not destruction, not chaos, something worse. Reclassification. Inside Haven Null, Commander Elias Ward watched the tactical display fracture into layered probability states. The anomaly was no longer a single presence. It had begun dividing itself into operational, thought threads, each one independently evaluating different parts of the battlefield. An analyst spoke slowly, almost disbelieving. It's running parallel judgment processes on all civilizations present. Ward didn't look away. It's deciding what we are allowed to be. Silence followed, because no one had a counter-doctrine for that. Above Neptune, Imperial Admiral Saren's fleet was no longer a fleet in any meaningful sense. Half its ships drifted disabled. Others were caught in intermittent causality loops, repeating micro-actions without progression. A firing sequence that never reached discharge, a retreat order that never completed execution. And the Emperor's secret weapon, once believed unstoppable, was now suspended mid-activation, locked in a state of partial existence. Saren's voice was low. It's holding it like a hand around a flame. A junior officer whispered, "Sir, it's not destroying it." Saren's eyes narrowed. It's studying how to extinguish it permanently. Then Neptune itself reacted. Deep beneath the ice and engineered crust, where humanity had built its hidden civilization, something older than the modern fleet structures began to respond. Not human-built systems, not imperial interference. Something sealed long before either empire understood warfare. Inside Haven Null, alarms triggered across forbidden archives. An analyst turned pale. "Sir, we're detecting activation signals from the pre-collapse strata." Ward's expression changed for the first time since awakening. "Which layer?" The analyst hesitated. "The first expansion era, early interstellar human development." A pause, and something else deeper. Ward understood instantly. That shouldn't still exist. Above Neptune, the anomaly paused its evaluation. For the first time since arrival, its distributed presence flickered. Not confusion, recognition. And in that moment, something beneath Neptune answered. The ice-covered ocean of Neptune ruptured in controlled fractures. Not explosions, not collapse. Opening. Massive containment fields that had existed for millennia dissolved, revealing structures that had never been part of the current human command hierarchy. Ships emerged. Not modern vanguard vessels. Not experimental dreadnoughts. Ancient warframes from humanity's earliest expansion into interstellar space, rebuilt, reinforced, and sealed away after doctrines deemed them excessively escalatory. They were not designed for diplomacy. They were designed for survival at any cost. The designation flashed across human systems. Ares Line Fleet active. Inside Haven Null, Ward stepped forward slowly. "No," he whispered. An analyst turned, "Sir." Ward's voice was quieter, now heavier. "They activated the Forgotten Fleet." A pause. "The ones we buried, because we were afraid of what they would become." Above Neptune, the Ares Line fleet rose in formation. They did not respond to Imperial presence. They did not acknowledge human command requests. They responded to something deeper. A core directive older than modern governance systems. Threat to human continuity detected. And then, they moved. Imperial Admiral Saren watched in disbelief as new signatures flooded his tactical display. More ships, he muttered. But this was different. These vessels did not emerge from hyperspace. They emerged from beneath reality's perception threshold, as if they had always been present but deliberately ignored by detection systems. One analyst spoke in a shaken voice. "Sir, these ships are not registered in any Imperial or known human database." Saren stared at them. "Then who do they belong to?" The answer came instantly. A fragmented transmission, translated through system filters. "We belong to survival." The Ares Line fleet ignited. And space changed. Not warped. Not bent. Changed. Physics around the fleet became locally subordinate to their movement. Gravity fields stabilized into engineered corridors. Weapon systems fired in perfect synchronization without communication lag. And their first target acquisition was immediate. Not Imperial forces. Not the anomaly. The Emperor's secret weapon. Inside Haven Null, Ward realized what was happening. "They're not under command protocols," he said sharply. "They're operating on ancient autonomy directives." An analyst replied, "Sir, they're targeting everything classified as existential escalation." Ward's jaw tightened. That includes the Empire's weapon. A pause. And potentially the anomaly. Above Neptune, the battlefield entered its third phase. Imperial forces were collapsing. Human vanguard fleets were repositioning defensively. The anomaly was evaluating both as part of a larger system. And now, the Ares Line fleet had entered the equation. Saren's voice cracked slightly. "We're no longer in control of anything." Then he saw it. The anomaly had shifted focus. Not to the Emperor's weapon. Not to the Ares fleet. But to the interaction between them. It was watching them converge. Like an observer finally seeing a pattern worth recording. Inside Haven Null, Ward whispered the realization forming in his mind. "It's not trying to win." An analyst turned slowly. "Sir." Ward stared at the display. "It's trying to see what happens when everything we buried finally wakes up." The Ares Line fleet locked onto firing vectors. The Emperor's secret weapon stabilized briefly. The anomaly expanded once more, forming a structure of impossible geometry across Neptune's orbital plane. And for the first time since humanity returned to the stars, all three forces aligned toward inevitable contact. Ward gave the final order. "Prepare for convergence event." A pause. Then quietly, "And pray we survive what comes out of it." Above Neptune, the galaxy held its breath. Because the war was no longer between empires. It was between every hidden truth they had ever tried to bury. And something in the dark was beginning to learn from all of them at once. By the time the convergence event stabilized above Neptune, the galaxy had already started to fracture politically, militarily, and psychologically. News did not travel anymore. It detonated. On Zethurian core, the Imperial Senate chamber was in total collapse of order. Holographic feeds from Neptune overlapped across every wall, each showing contradictory battlefield states. Fleets existing, vanishing, reappearing, and rewriting engagement outcomes in real time. Senators shouted over each other. "This is a containment failure." "No, it's a rebel resurgence." Impossible, humanity was erased. Admiral Saren's transmission interrupted them all. "Stop speculating," his voice echoed through the chamber, strained but controlled. "We are not fighting a rebellion. We are not fighting pirates. We are not even fighting a civilization in the traditional sense." A pause. "We are inside an evaluation event." Silence hit the chamber harder than any weapon. Across Imperial space, fleet commanders demanded clarification, but none came. Because at Neptune, command structures were no longer stable enough to interpret hierarchy. Three forces now occupied the system. The Imperial Armada, desperate and fragmented. The human vanguard fleets, disciplined but restrained. And the Ares Line fleet, ancient and autonomous, moving like judgment itself. And above them all, the anomaly. Watching, learning, adapting. Inside Haven Null, Commander Elias Ward stood before the central display. The survival archive systems were now running at full capacity, but even they were struggling to keep predictive models stable. An analyst spoke urgently. "Sir, the Ares fleet is closing on the Emperor's weapon." Ward nodded slowly, and the anomaly. A pause. "It's not intervening." Ward's expression tightened, because it wants to see the outcome. Above Neptune, the battlefield reached equilibrium instability. The Emperor's secret weapon remained partially active, its reality collapse field fluctuating as the anomaly held it in a suspended state of interrogation. The Ares Line fleet advanced in perfect formation, each vessel aligned not by command, but by shared intent encoded in their oldest survival directive. And the anomaly expanded again. But this time it did not target ships. It targeted relationships. Saren watched as entire fleet formations began to drift apart, not due to damage, but due to altered coordination logic. Communication chains degraded in selective regions. Tactical synchronization failed not because systems broke, but because they no longer agreed on shared reality parameters. "What is it doing?" a junior officer asked, voice shaking. Saren's eyes narrowed. "It's breaking coherence." A pause. "It's making us incapable of acting as a unified system." Inside Haven Null, Ward realized the implication instantly. "It's dismantling coordination itself," he said quietly. An analyst responded, "Sir, that means no fleet can maintain structured engagement." Ward's voice hardened. "Exactly." He looked at the projection again. "It doesn't need to destroy armies. It just needs to ensure they cannot function as armies." Then unexpectedly, the Ares Line fleet changed behavior. They stopped advancing. Every ship froze mid-vector. Inside Haven Null, alarms spiked. "Sir, the Ares fleet has halted all offensive movement." Ward leaned forward. "Why?" The answer came seconds later. A new transmission. Not from Imperial systems. Not from human command. From the Ares fleet itself. Primary threat, REVLUATD. A pause. Then, anomaly classified as systemic observer. Silence followed, because no one had expected that conclusion. Above Neptune, the anomaly reacted for the first time with visible structural change. Not aggression. Not defense. Interest. Its distributed intelligence condensed slightly, focusing entirely on the Ares fleet. It had noticed something. They were not reacting like the Empire. They were not reacting like humanity. They were reacting like something that understood evaluation cycles. Saren's voice was barely audible. "It's acknowledging them." A sensor officer whispered, "Sir, the anomaly is adjusting its model again." Saren stared at the battlefield. "Adjusting how?" The answer came instantly. "A new classification. Secondary Ascension Candidate DETCTD." Inside Haven Null, Ward went still. "Secondary," he repeated quietly. An analyst turned, "Sir." Ward didn't answer immediately, because the implication was too large to speak quickly. "Finally, it means we're not the only civilization being evaluated." A pause. "And we never were." Above Neptune, the anomaly expanded again, but differently. It formed a layered structure, almost like a lattice of observational logic spanning the entire system. The Emperor's secret weapon flickered under its influence. The Ares Line fleet reoriented slightly, no longer targeting destruction but containment paths. And humanity watched. Inside Haven Null, Ward gave a new order. Pull all human fleets into observational formation. An analyst hesitated. Sir, that means we're ceasing engagement entirely. Ward nodded. We were never the dominant variable in this equation. He looked at the projection. We're witnesses now. The Imperial Senate, still watching live feeds, fell into stunned silence. Because for the first time, no one was winning. No one was losing. Everything was being measured. And somewhere beyond known space, something far larger than any of them had ever imagined was updating its understanding of the galaxy. Saren whispered almost to himself. We didn't find a war. A pause. We found a test that never ends. Above Neptune, all three forces stabilized into uneasy alignment. Humanity, the Empire, the Ares Line fleet, and the Anomaly, observing all of them equally. Then, for the first time since contact began, it transmitted a final system-wide message. Convergence complete, next phase initiating. And every civilization in the system realized at once. The evaluation had never been about survival. It was about what comes after survival. The message did not fade after it appeared. It stayed, burned into every system, every sensor feed, every neural-linked command interface across Neptune's orbit. Convergence complete, next phase initiating. For a long moment, nothing moved. Not the Imperial fleet. Not the human vanguard formations. Not even the Ares Line fleet. It was as if the entire system had been placed inside a paused heartbeat. Then reality answered. Inside Haven Null, Commander Elias Ward stood perfectly still as the survival archive began outputting warnings it had never been designed to generate. Not tactical alerts, not threat classifications, but existential uncertainty flags. An analyst whispered, Sir, the archive cannot classify what comes next. Ward's eyes narrowed. Why not? The answer appeared on the main display. No historical precedent found. A pause. Then, no comparable civilization state EXISTS. Ward exhaled slowly. So this is new. Above Neptune, the anomaly began to fracture. Not collapse. Not retreat. Fragment. Its distributed intelligence split into layered observational nodes, each one focusing on a different part of the system, as if preparing for simultaneous outcomes. The Emperor's secret weapon flickered again, still suspended. The Imperial fleet drifted in broken formation, incapable of cohesion. The Ares Line fleet held position, waiting. And humanity waited with them. But none of them were the center anymore. Something else was arriving. Saren felt it before sensors confirmed it. A pressure in space that wasn't localized. Not entering the system. Expanding into it. Report, he snapped. A sensor officer froze. Sir, external boundary is collapsing inward. Saren turned sharply. Explain. The officer swallowed. It's not a fleet, sir. A pause. It's a transition. Then the edge of the galaxy, beyond Neptune, opened. Not like hyperspace. Not like wormhole emergence. But like a layer of reality being gently peeled back to reveal something underneath. And from it, something vast began to enter. At first, it was only signatures. Millions of them. Then billions. Then patterns so dense that Imperial systems stopped counting entirely and simply labeled it. Unresolvable mass presence. Ward saw it too. His voice dropped. That's what the anomaly was waiting for. An analyst looked up. Sir. Ward didn't blink. This wasn't the test. A pause. This was the invitation. Above Neptune, the anomaly restructured one final time. Its distributed intelligence condensed into a singular observation lattice. And for the first time since arrival, it aligned itself with the incoming presence. Not defensively, not aggressively, recognitively. Saren's voice was barely a whisper now. It knows them. The incoming presence crossed the system boundary. and reality bent in response. Not violently, not destructively, naturally, as if the galaxy had always been incomplete and something was finally filling the missing portion. Imperial ships began to shut down entirely, not from attack, but from systemic incompatibility. Their navigation systems could not compute the scale of what was arriving. Human vanguard fleets reduced power output automatically, entering survival observation mode. Even the Ares Line fleet adjusted its posture. Because whatever was coming was not part of any doctrine ever written. Inside Haven Null, alarms went silent. Not because systems failed, but because alarms were no longer meaningful. Ward looked at the display. "What are you?" he asked quietly. No system answered, because none could define it. Then, a response came. Not through comms, not through sensors, but directly into every consciousness connected to the battlefield. A thought, not language, not sound, understanding. Observation phase complete. A pause. Then, species multiple. Saren clenched his jaw. This is not one entity. Ward finished it. It's a collective evaluation intelligence. The incoming presence fully entered the Neptune system. And for the first time, it became visible. Not as ships, not as beings, but as layered constructs of probability and structure, civilizations existing in stacked phases of development, moving as one unified observational ecosystem. And at their center, something older than both humanity and the Empire. Something that had been watching long before either existed. Inside Haven Null, Ward's voice was quiet now. "This is what we awakened." An analyst whispered, "Sir, are we in danger?" Ward looked at the projection of the incoming collective intelligence. "No." A pause. "We were never the subject of danger." Another pause. "We were the subject of curiosity." Above Neptune, the final transmission arrived. From the collective. Clear. Absolute. Unavoidable. CIVILIZATI. AL cycle completion DETSCTED. A pause. Then the words that ended everything humanity thought it understood. Initiating galactic integration sequence. The Imperial fleet did not resist. They could not. The Ares Line fleet did not fire. They no longer had a defined target. Humanity did not move, because movement no longer had meaning in a system being rewritten from outside its own rules. Saren stared into the void. And for the first time, the Admiral of the Galactic Empire understood the truth. We were never alone in the galaxy. A pause. We were just early. Inside Haven Null, Ward closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, the battlefield was gone. Not destroyed. Not erased. Transformed. And in its place, something far larger than war had begun. The galaxy was no longer a collection of empires. It was becoming something else. And humanity, after 3,000 years of hiding beneath Neptune, had just been invited into its next form. But somewhere beyond even the collective intelligence, something else still watched, and it had not yet decided whether integration was acceptable or an interruption.